So I hope that everyone can see my screen. This work invention was essentially a collaborative effort between myself and Sang Eun Han, who is a junior faculty, or a colleague, I should say, in the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering, who is the main intellectual driver behind this idea. I provide a lot of the process knowledge, materials engineering, actual experimental effort that we can put into to this idea. Andy provides the idea about how you can structurally evolve or cause the evolution or computationally evolve the structure in such a way to achieve an optimum structure, whether it be achieving the maximum reflectance or maximum absorptance, for example. Brian Kerr at Sandia does a lot of very small submicron 3D printing, in which case we're trying to actually replicate the optimized structure and render that into a real 3D structure we can test and characterize. So it's a really good team of research faculty, PIs, who are putting together an effort to do structural optimization, especially when it comes to camouflage. So just to orient the audience, light scattering is everywhere, and certainly we see a clear glass versus frosted glass. So really depending on the structure that you can impart to the surface or within the medium, you can make that transparent glass material to be very highly scattering and therefore ultimately very reflective. So you can completely reject the sunlight, for example, by simply making the structure fine structure on the surface so that it reflects the light rather than transmitting it. So we want to stretch that idea to different, essentially to different areas of the spectrum, whether it be infrared or UV or visible. And in terms of actually accelerating the evolution, what we're doing is the following. So in nature, you find a lot of unique structures that give rise to whether it's a super suction cups of salamanders grabbing onto a wall and climbing. Certainly there's iridescence that you observe, or in this case, a beetle, white beetle, that with a very thin skeletal structure completely rejects the sunlight and appears white to the naked eye. And so what we're trying to do is we capture the structure that is responsible for that unique property, and we can actually extract 3 to 4 descriptors like what we call autocorrelation or lineal function. And then we evolve the structure in silicon computationally by evolving the descriptors that are unique to that structure that you're trying to evolve. And at the end of the day, by evolving it and with a certain constraints they would put in, we can evolve the structure to be more sensitive to, instead of in the visible, we can make it sensitive to IR, etc. Now, going further than that, we want to incorporate artificial materials like silk, or rather reconstituted silk, or polyethylene, or other plastic materials that are low cost, and utilizing these low cost materials to mimic the nature and maybe make a fabric that is completely reflective in the IR, or make it completely reflective in the visible, but highly emitting in the IR, etc. So we're really trying to optimize or control the optical properties by mimicking the nature, but also evolving, further optimizing what nature offers by evolving it, going through the computational evolution. Hope that made sense so far. So the way we actually computationally evolve the structure that's in our hand is as follows. So rather somewhat used to be a cross section of a beetle's scale. So if you peel it off and slice it vertically, the cross section looks like this. Lots of serpentine, sort of elongated structure that's in the scale. What we call autocorrelation. And what we do is, I guess if you watch PBS, sometimes people reconstruct a person's face from a skeleton, right? Very similar. What we do is we take away the putties from the model, essentially deconstructing it. We take the meat away from that skeleton, and then we reattach the meat to the skeleton, but in such a way that will either maximize the reflectance or maximize the transmission, etc. So there's an objective function that we want to optimize for, but what we are doing is computationally take the meat away from the skeleton and let the putties reattach themselves, but while optimizing the structure by evolving the descriptors such as autocorrelation. Did I make sense so far? It's a little bit maybe esoteric, but I just wanted to make sure that audience understood. And so that's the kinds of evolutionary algorithm that we use to evolve the structure to optimize what we are trying to get. And that work has just been submitted. But of course, that's fancy science, but we really wanted to translate that to something usable. So can we actually create something like this from silk or reconstituted silk? Silk actually has a very, it's not complicated, but it has its own structure where it has an outer layer of protein encapsulating two strands of inside protein strands. And what we do is we remove the outer layer and dissolve what's in the core, and then we reconstitute that into a fiber. And what we found out is that depending on the structure and diameter of that fabric that we create, just going to ignore busy slide, but this LZZ star that I'm showing you, the smaller the number is, more reflective that fabric is. And so when we use a very thin, on the order of maybe a submicron, maybe half a micron or less, in this case, fiber diameter, and electrospin it in such a way, random way, we're able to really minimize the what we call transform mean free path for the light. That means with a very thin layer of engineered silk, we can effectively block all the sunlight and block it. So please allow me to show what I mean by that. See this silk with a very small diameter and structured in such a way that it reflects the sunlight. At least it's been optimized for the visible spectrum. It looks completely white. And whereas if you were to use a raw silk or electrospun, same material, but a little bit slightly larger diameter, it's not as reflective. And so you see a slight tint, almost slightly brownish color that is that you observe with your naked eye. And what that allows you to do is, surprisingly, that if you were to wear it as clothing item, then your body temperature can fall below the ambient temperature while you're sitting in the sun. And that is, if you were to measure the temperature of an object, black object covered by electrospun microsilk, large diameter, or raw silk, and if you look at the actual ambient temperature during the hottest time of the day, this was June 28th of last year, pretty sunny, hot, sunny day, summer day in Albuquerque, and these two temperatures rise above the ambient temperature, but the engineered silk fabric that we created falls almost 6 degrees Fahrenheit below the ambient temperature during the hottest time of the day. That's because we're able to engineer the reflectance in such a way we're completely rejecting the sunlight. And silk happens to have relatively reasonably high emissivity in the IR. So that's the kind of engineering that we do to create a reflectance or a camouflage. And maybe that will be much clearer on the next slide. So depending on, especially in the IR, if you want to manipulate the heat signature, you really have to manipulate the emissivity, reflectivity, transmission, etc. Of course, there is a competing work that's been done, but at the end of the day, they're using such complicated structure. You have to do a nanofabrication, create these silicon nanowires, top-down fabrication, or grow it. And you have to actually have to build an active circuitry below it to control, essentially actuate the device in such a way that it can independently control the emissivity, reflectivity, etc. It is not a scalable technology to cover an entire, let's say, an armored vehicle. No way. It's not going to go that far. It's not a scalable technology. And so what we're doing is using very low-cost fabric technology, whether it's silk or polyethylene, which is very low cost, and being able to really control the reflectivity, transmission, absorptivity in such a way that we can actually change the heat signature of an object and use it as a way of camouflaging, whether it's an armored vehicle, a person in the field, etc. So with that, I will end my presentation.